Welcome back in, one and all, to the channel. I am very pleased to be hosting yet another astrology chit-chat, and in this video, I want to highlight an aspect that I feel is just not getting the attention and traction it deserves in astrological social media spaces, and there's a few major contributing factors as to why I think we should be giving it more attention and focusing on it as it unfolds in the sky. Now, this aspect is actually perfecting while I film this, so this video is going to be going up on the channel a little bit late. I apologize for that. I have a bit of a backlog that I'm trying to play catch up with right now. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of today's video, I just want to say, as always, in case we haven't been formally introduced, hey there, I'm Howie. I'm a professional reader of tarot cards and astrology by trade. I'm a chronic non-reader of horror fiction in my spare time, and I'm a huge planning enthusiast. Because let's face it, something around here needs to help me keep all of these crazy trains of thoughts running on the tracks. As I mentioned, today's video is going to feature an underdog of an aspect, and that is Mars in Taurus sextiling Venus in Cancer. And those three major factors that I wanted to highlight about this aspect are: one, the fact that Mars is in Taurus, which is his exile. And so he typically experiences difficulty and challenges expressing himself in this space. But number two, this is Venus's domicile. And so there is a subtle form of not quite so mutual reception going on here, where Venus can still actively participate in this conversation in order to give Mars some assistance and mitigating advice as he transits this challenging space. And finally, the third factor that I want to highlight here is that this aspect perfects at 0 degrees of these two signs. So the introductory degree of Taurus and Cancer. Anytime you have an aspect that perfects at either 0 degrees, the very beginning of a sign, or at the end at 29 degrees, there is a certain level of nuanced importance placed on that aspect. We are either opening a significant chapter, or we are closing it and moving on to the next one. Now, let me preface this video with a personal observation. And this is just my personal observation, my little piddly personal opinion, but I feel like the positive aspects in astrology, so the trines and the sextiles, like this one we're going to talk about today, don't seem to get as much attention in astrological social media as I feel like they should. It seems to be very easy to highlight and latch on to the obstacles, the challenges, and the delays that squares and oppositions can create, whereas trines and sextiles seem to be easy to miss, overlook, or even dismiss because that's kind of their essence. They're meant to be points of ease. They're meant to bring a soothing sort of energy into our personal everyday lives. And I think that type of positivity does deserve its own platform and should be included in our day-to-day practices. If we're always on high alert, the nervous system just does not get a chance to rest and reset. Let's focus on those silver linings every once in a while, shall we? Especially when we're talking about a sextile here, where one of the contributing factors is that our superior planet, Mars, is actually sitting in his exile. First and foremost, let's take a look at the actual aspect, the geometry of what these two planets are doing in our birth charts right now. And they are forming what is called a sextile, where they are two signs away from each other. So if you look at the zodiacal wheel, you'll see Mars in Taurus, Gemini is next, followed by Cancer, which will be hosting Venus. So two signs away. And this aspect corresponds to Venus and Venus's nature. So this is a harmonizing and collaborative aspect. The conversation between these two planets, or any two planets that are forming a sextile, will be easygoing, collaborative. There'll be an ebb and a flow, a give and a receive between the two. This is a very beneficial aspect when it comes to two planets working together to accomplish something, and sort of standing more on equal ground as well. You'll hear me talk about superior and inferior placements when it comes to aspects, and all that really means is the planet that is first in zodiacal order, in our example here, that would be Mars in Taurus, because Taurus comes before Cancer in the zodiacal wheel, that superior planet will basically be dictating the substance or the circumstances within which the inferior planets, the planets further along the zodiacal order, has to operate. So Mars is basically giving direction to Venus from Venus's hometown, essentially. So it's a really interesting dynamic we have going on. You can see what I mean by there's a lot of nuance here. But now that we understand the basic premise of a sextile in the astrological language, now we have a basic understanding that this isn't necessarily an aspect to be feared or to be worried about. There are some positive manifestations that this aspect can reflect in our personal day-to-day lives. And that is what we're going to get into. But first, let's just quickly look at what these two planets mean in these two signs. We gotta know what the base parts of the equation are before we start delineating the answers, the story that they're trying to tell. Let's start with Mars in Taurus, which, as I mentioned, is his detriment or his exile, so he doesn't really like chilling out in Taurus. He would actually much rather be across the zodiacal wheel in his domicile of Scorpio. And the interesting thing to remember about these two fixed signs is when they take place during the year itself, in the northern hemisphere anyway. And Scorpio season happens at a point in the year where the sun's light is in a fixed state of descension, ready to strike the horizon and disappear, bringing on the winter, a period of loss, of cold, of death, of solitude and quiet. Whereas in Taurus, it's still spring. In fact, today has been the first official, temperature-wise, day of summer over here in Montreal, and I'm thrilled about it. So the opposite of that is the sun's light being in a fixed state of ascension over the horizon again. We are moving towards the apex above the horizon, which is the summer solstice in Cancer, and I'll get to that in just a moment when we talk about Venus. So that is the contrariety between these two signs. Scorpio embraces the idea of finality and endings and death, and is a very investigative, inquisitive sign. It is loyal, sometimes to a fault, because it craves digging deep. It needs to get to the bottom of something. It needs to dive under the surface, go far below in subterranean spaces, and it does not fear those shadowy nooks and crannies. Now in Taurus, ruled by Venus, this is a sign that is all about life starting to grow. So green is really the major color here. Even though it is an earth sign, to me, Taurus is just greenery in general, because now our sprouts are growing, our garden is starting to flower and blossom. So whereas Scorpio is comfortable in the shadows, Taurus is far more comfortable in the light, in a place of visibility. Now, one key player we can't forget with Taurus is that Taurus's exaltation ruler is also the moon. And so we have this double dose of feminine, receptive, easygoing energy. And there's also a lot of embodiment of sensuality and tactile sensory experiences that happen with Taurus. The moon rules the body. Because Taurus is all about those life-giving qualities, it is ruled by a benefic, it is ruled by the moon. The sensory experiences that it would prefer to experience are positive ones, leisurely ones, luxurious ones. Whereas Mars, as a planet, can often represent irritants, agitation, severance, cutting, slashing, maiming, ripping, and tearing. It is a planet of violence and aggression and war. So right there you have an immediate contrariety explaining why Mars struggles to express himself in a place that is all about feel-good vibes. Moving on to Venus in Cancer. Now, Venus isn't particularly dignified or undignified in Cancer. However, interesting side note, Venus will be entering Cancer and entering her decan of Cancer. So the first 10 degrees of Cancer are ruled by Venus. So she gets a bit of a bonus, an uptick in her ability to express herself during that introductory phase of this sign. Now, what is Cancer? as a representation of the summer solstice. Well, this is the longest days, the longest amount of daylight that we're able to experience in the northern hemisphere. So Cancer is all about life-giving qualities. It is about warmth, welcoming energies, welcoming sensations. Because it is ruled by the moon, you have a sense of memory and nostalgia associated with Cancer. And Cancer can represent the metaphorical definition of home. So whatever home means to us, Cancer represents that sensation of safety, security, comfort, and stability is another important one. Taurus is also about stability. Cancer is similar, but with a slightly different twist, a more emotional perspective, because we're dealing with a water sign now, not an earth sign. Speaking of exaltation rulers, let's not forget that Jupiter, who is currently transiting Cancer, is exalted in this sign. So Jupiter's jovial, abundant, expansive, and spiritual qualities are also sprinkled in with the significations that Cancer holds. There's a materiality to Cancer, a focus on it. And sometimes that focus as a shadow side can become an obsession, a codependence on materialistic comfort. And that is represented by the sun's descent. It is not in a state of fixed dissension like in a sign like Scorpio, for example, but the summer solstice begins at 0 degrees of Cancer, and from that point, we do start experiencing shorter and shorter daytime. So, that idea of descending from an apex that is still very visible, it is still above the horizon, is the symbolic representation of taking ideas from source, taking this otherworldly, all-knowing intellect and presence, and bringing it down to the realm of fortune, to the mundane material plane. This is the basis of the relationship between the sun and the moon. The moon reflects the sun's light astronomically, quite literally, and so in astrology, you get the same idea. The sun is the soul, and the moon, which is the reflection of the soul, is the physical body, the vessel within which the soul exists. Within Cancer, there is also an emphasis on that concept of bonding or bondedness. And similar to what I said earlier, this can have a light side or a shadow side. Think about it. The moon often represents the mother. And so what happens when a baby is born? It is still technically connected to the mother via the umbilical cord and then eventually the placenta. And what do? We sever that cord. So interestingly, with that image in mind, even Cancer can signify a sort of severance, but it's more a severance of bringing something into existence rather than the violent severance that Mars would represent. The severance in Cancer is one that requires maturity. It is necessary for growth. So Cancer can represent both the joy of simply existing, but also the anxiety of being codependent and requiring some form of security bond with another person, another being, or the concept of safety and security and even a little bit of isolation. With Venus ingressing into Cancer, this cardinal feminine water sign, we can expect significations such as a withdrawing into our comfiest, coziest relationships, our most important interpersonal connections. Venus rules relationships, and so there could be a heavy focus on nurturing and nourishing our relationships, especially when it comes to women-centric interpersonal connections. Venus can signify women in general. So women and femmes may experience a highlight during this particular transit. Venus is essentially entering a sign that can represent the home and the comfort that we feel at home. Venus is also beauty and aesthetics and creativity. She does find her joy in the 5th house of creativity in our charts. So while she's in Cancer, There could be a materialization of our creative ideas, the ideas that we hold close to our hearts as well. There's a really deep felt emotional attachment to any sort of creative work that is done while Venus is in Cancer. And of course, there's always that risk of codependency. We always have a light and a shadow side to anything. Venus could bring a codependency to a materialistic love, a materialistic sense of safety. Coming back to Jupiter's rulership in Cancer, Venus in Cancer can also see our interpersonal relationships start to mature. Perhaps there is a sort of severance of some kind that allows us to grow to the next phase of these dynamics with the people around us. Maturity is difficult to acquire, self-awareness is difficult to hold, and Venus entering Cancer brings a sort of ease and leisure to it. She can soothe us through these more challenging points of our life changing. All right, you took all your notes, you got all that down? Great, perfect. Now we're on to the fun part. Now we get to put all of our mishmash of ideas and keywords and create our stories, our delineations with it. So taking into consideration all of these major factors I talked about, the significations of the signs involved, of the planets involved, here's a few things that you may want to keep an eye out for or pay attention to as we navigate this transit. To start with, we have severance from both Mars and Cancer. And Mars in Taurus, a great analogy that another astrologer provided in another video is the idea of a gardener. But a gardener at the very start of the planting phase, where you need to rip up last year's overgrowth, last year's dead roots, dead plants, the weeds. We need to forcibly rip up the earth and till it, to loosen it up, to make room for something fertile to grow here. It can be considered and looked at as a metaphorical violent act upon the earth, but it is necessary work, a necessary discomfort in order to grow something beautiful and nourishing, our food systems. So Mars sextiling Venus could bring about a severance or a clearing out or a purging of some kind that is required in order to till the lands, to make room for something that is more aligned with us, that nourishes our character, our self, our soul. This is a transit that might have people seeing some significant emotional growth in their personal lives. And honestly, if I imagine the zodiacal wheel in my mind's eye, I would say a delineation like this, where we are clearing out old dead weight in order to till soil, to grow something new, typically something emotionally valuable to us. This may hit most accurately to all of my Aries and Aquarius risings in the comments, because where Taurus and Cancer sit in your charts, those house topics really reflect and resonate with this delineation. Now, one thing about Mars is he can bring his own sensory experience to the table, especially in a tactile sign like Taurus. But because it's fiery Mars, these sensations can range from warming and soothing like a hot cup of tea on a cold, rainy day, or scathing, burning, an agitated rash of some kind. With that in mind, this sextile between Mars and Venus could see some fiery sensory experiences within our interpersonal relationships that range from warming, welcoming, comforting, that idea that I said earlier where we may withdraw into our relationships, take some steps back from other aspects of our lives to focus on our relationships, to very scathing, very heated, very unpleasant experiences because of Mars's ability to agitate. He's in a space where he needs to move slower and with more intention. And so Mars's frustration with not being able to be quick and on top of things and just impulsively act could manifest in the way we interact and react with our loved ones. Now, speaking of those fiery, heated sensory experiences with Mars, listen, let's not forget, Mars is a planet of sex, of desire. That passion isn't just spirited passion. It can very well be raw sexual libido. And in a tactile sign like Taurus, where we are speaking with Venus, the planet of love, the planet of relationships and romance. Look, I'm gonna be honest, some of us may be experiencing a very heightened sense of sexuality in our interpersonal dynamics. And given that this is my channel, there is absolutely no shame in that. Go forth and multiply, my friend. Just stay safe. Alright? And to all my Capricorn risings in the comments, this delineation might hit y'all most accurately compared to other signs because you've got Taurus in the 5th and Cancer in the 7th. Good luck, my friends. Now, when it comes to interacting in our relationships and even our platonic interpersonal dynamics, Mars as a positive brings action to the table and confidence as well. Mars is a conqueror. Mars wants to feel accomplished and get things done. With his dialogue with Venus, where our relationships and how we relate to other people is highlighted, we could see some folks stepping into a more confident role when it comes to asking to have their damn needs met, asking to have their wants and desires met. I get it. Asking for what you want can be really difficult, especially if you are a retired people pleaser like yours truly. It is important to be able to articulate and explain our needs and then wait to see if the other person is able to not only receive our request, understand it, but then meet that need. For all my Taurus risings and Pisces risings out in the comments, this delineation might hit you most accurately. Again, based on where Taurus and Cancer are sitting in your personal birth chart. Taurus can often represent resources, resource management, and resource acquisition. Again, we're thinking of that garden analogy and the time of the year it's at in the Northern Hemisphere when we have Taurus season. Mars's agitated, fiery persona in Taurus could bring about conflict and frustration with systems surrounding resources and resource management. This frustration can be experienced around the concept of the home and safety as well, because again, we're in a dialogue with Venus in Cancer. And all of this could stem from a sense of restlessness. Remember what I said earlier, Mars can experience frustration in a sign that forces him to slow down. Mars is not necessarily a slow, process-oriented planet. He is very masculine. He is very fiery. He requires movement in order to feel comfortable. This kind of delineation might hit all of the Libra and Sagittarius risings in the comments based on where Taurus and Cancer sit in your birth charts. So, hey there, fellow Sagittarians. You and me both. And lastly, I really emphasized this when I was just highlighting Venus in Cancer alone, but with the addition of that actionable drive that Mars carries with him, the desire and the capacity to bring our creative ideas to fruition, to the tangible realm, really can take place at a time like this, where we have a harmonizing, collaborative aspect to the planet that drives us forward. So any aesthetic and creative visions that we've been holding on to now might be a fantastic time to start taking actionable steps to bring those into existence. And there you have it, folks. A handy-dandy but brief little guidebook that you can use to help navigate any sort of occurrences and happenings that unfold as we navigate these transits together, whether those happenings be positive or negative. If any of my content resonates with you and you've been enjoying the learning experience thus far, I wholeheartedly invite you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more content in the future all about astrology, horoscopes, tarot, journaling, and even book reviews. And if you're even more curious about what your birth chart has to say about you and your life story thus far, then by all means, I invite you to join me over on Instagram. The link to my profile is down below in the description, where you can book a one-on-one virtual consultation with yours truly. I offer a variety of tarot card readings and birth chart readings, and I would love to have a one-on-one conversation with you to delineate the inner machinations of your birth chart and what is to come in your life story in the future. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you have a fantastic day, and even more fantastic rest of your week. Don't sweat the small stuff, and don't forget to take care of yourselves and each other, especially in times like these. Bye-bye.